today. And it's so amazing that almost 200 years after his death, that he's still such a relevant author and influences so much of our modern culture. It's pretty amazing. He's more popular now than he was basically in his own time, I think, from what I understand anyway. So it's pretty cool. And I got this book from the library, paper out of the way. That's a compilation that was published on the 200th anniversary of his birth. It's called In the Shadow of the Master, and it has essays from famous horror and mystery writers that coincide along with the stories, so it's kind of interesting. And the introduction is by Michael Connelly. And I just wanted to share it with you because it kind of tells a lot about Poe. And it starts out, "Happy birthday, Edgar Allan Poe. Seems strange using the name and that word happy in the same sentence. A tragic and morose figure in his short life, Poe is celebrated today, 200 years after his birth, as a mad genius who started it all rolling in the genre of mystery fiction. His influence in other genres and fields of entertainment, from poetry to music to film, is incalculable. To put it simply, Edgar Allan Poe's work has echoed loudly across 2 centuries and will undoubtedly echo for at least 2 more. He walked across a field of pristine grass, not a single blade broken. Today, that path is worn down to a deep trench that crosses the imagination of the entire world. If you look at bestseller lists, movie charts, television ratings, they are simply dominated by the mystery genre and its many offshoots. The tendrils of imagination behind these contemporary works can be traced all the way back to Poe. This collection is presented by the Mystery Writers of America. Since day one, this organization has held Edgar Allan Poe as its symbol of excellence. The annual award bestowed by the MWA on the authors of books, television shows, films that merit a bust of Edgar Allan Poe. It is a caricature, and what is most notable about the figures is the figure's head is oversized to the point of being as wide as his shoulders. Having the honor of guest editing this collection of stories and essays, I now realize why Edgar's head is so big. I'm not going to get analytical about Poe's life or work. I'll leave that to his disciples. Gathered here with his most notable works are the long and short thoughts of those who follow Poe, the writers who directly or not so directly have taken inspiration from him. These are Edgar winners, best-selling authors, and practitioners of the short story. From Stephen King, who writes so eloquently of his connection to Poe, to Susan Grafton, who lovingly and grudgingly gives Poe his due, to the late Edward Hoche, who penned over 975 short stories. These writers are the modern masters of the world that Poe created. The idea here is simple. This is a birthday party. The 20 guests invited here by the Mystery Writers of America have come to honor Edgar Allan Poe on his 200th birthday. We celebrate his work, and we celebrate all that his work has wrought. I wonder what Poe would think of this. My guess is he'd have a big head. So that's the introduction to this book that has many, many essays in it, along with his most notable work, and I highly recommend it. And so, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Barnaby, who's going to do a dramatic reading of The Telltale Heart for us.
Like most everybody, I guess we learned about Poe in high school. That's when I first was introduced to Edgar Allan Poe's work. And I was part of a forensic team. And in 1970, I did a dramatic reading. It was before America's Got Talent. And it was set up through schools throughout Pennsylvania. And I read it then. And then 25 years later, when I was back in college, I used The Telltale Heart as my thesis for my English paper, and now 20 years later we'll do it again. So. A little background music. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been an M, but why would you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how calmly, how healthily I tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. Why, I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. Ah, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what stimulation I went to work. But I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out. And when I made an opening sufficient for my head, I thrust it in. Oh, would a madman been so cunning as this? And when my head was well in the room, I saw him lie upon his bed. I undid the lantern cautiously, for the hinges creaked, and undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when day broke, I went boldly into his chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he passed the night. So, you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him as he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch minute's hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feeling of triumph to think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he startled in his bed. Now you may think I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch, with a darkness, so I knew that he could not see the opening the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. And when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern, and my thumb slipped upon the fastening. The old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quiet and still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I had done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. And when I waited a long time very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. You cannot imagine how skillfully, until at length a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye like the thread of a spider. And it was open. wide, wide open. I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the sentence? I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. Oh, I knew that sound well. It was the beating of the old man's heart, and it increased my fury. But yet, I remained quiet and still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried as steadily as I could to maintain the ray upon the eye. Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? No. I have told you that I am nervous, and so yet, for a few minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. The old man hour has come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor, pulled a heavy bed over him. I smiled to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. Now, if you still think me mad, you will no longer when I describe with the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. First, I cut off the head, the arms, and the legs. I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited them between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could detect anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. And when I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight, and as the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night, and suspicion of foul play had been aroused, and they, the officers, were deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took the visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure and undisturbed. I brought chairs into the room and desired them there to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerfully, they chattered of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. And the ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct, I say. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued until at length I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. I talked more fluently with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I grasped for breath, but yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more violently, but the noise steadily increased. Why weren't they gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited by fury by the observation of these men. But the noise increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, and I swore. I swung the chair upon which I was sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder and louder, and louder, and still they chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they had not heard? Almighty God, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything more tolerable than this. I could bear their hypocritical smiles no longer. I thought I must scream or die. And again, hark, louder, 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 villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here is the beating of his hideous heart.